Welcome back to the logic of simple things. Today, we're tackling a question that sparked debates in bars, confused gift shoppers, and probably started a few family arguments at holiday dinners. What's the actual difference between whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon? Great question. And here's the thing. The answer is way more interesting than you'd think. We're talking international law, centuries-old grudges, actual fires, and very particular Scottish people who will correct you at parties. So grab your favorite drink, water's fine, we won't judge, and let's dive in. Okay, imagine whiskey as a massive family reunion. You've got all these relatives who share the same DNA, but they grew up in different countries, speak different languages, and have very different opinions about pretty much everything. At its heart, whiskey is just grain that's been fermented, distilled, and aged in barrels. Sounds simple, right? But here's where humans got creative or stubborn, depending on how you look at it. The Scots took barley, added some smoke, and created something complex enough to write poetry about. The Americans took corn, charred some barrels, and made something sweet enough to drink while building railroads. The Irish smoothed everything out and triple distilled it. The Japanese studied everyone else's homework and then made it perfect. And here's a fun twist, even the spelling is regional. In Scotland and Japan, it's whiskey with no E. In Ireland and America, it's whiskey with an E. Legend has it that the Irish added the E to differentiate their product from Scottish whiskey, essentially saying, "Ours is extra good." The Scots, naturally, were not amused. But the real personality differences? Those come from three things: what grain you use, where you age it, and what rules you're forced to follow. And trust me, the rules get specific. Let's talk about Scotch, because if whiskey were a family, Scotch would be that relative who keeps a copy of Robert's Rules of Order in their pocket and isn't afraid to use it. First rule, it must be made in Scotland. Not Scotland-inspired. Not made with Scottish methods. Actually, physically made in Scotland. The Scots got this legally protected worldwide, which is kind of like if your grandmother trademarked her cookie recipe and then sued everyone who tried to make it in other kitchens. But here's what makes this interesting. Scotland isn't just one flavor. It's basically 5 different countries pretending to be one. You got the Highlands, making Scotch that's bold and sometimes heathery. The Lowlands, where it's gentle and grassy. Speyside is the sweet spot for fruity, elegant malts. Campbellton, which used to have 30 distilleries and now has 3, making oily, briny, complex stuff. And then there's Islay. Oh, Islay. This tiny island off the west coast produces Scotch that tastes like a campfire ate a leather jacket and then went swimming in the ocean. People either love it immediately or make a face like they've been personally betrayed. There's no middle ground. That smoky flavor comes from peat, basically ancient, compressed plant matter that Scots burned during the malting process. Why? Because centuries ago, it was the only fuel available. Today, it's a tradition that separates casual drinkers from people who have opinions about phenol levels. Scotch also must age for at least 3 years in oak barrels, though most age much longer. And here's the kicker. They often use old bourbon barrels that Americans already used once. So Scotch is literally aged in bourbon's hand-me-downs. The circle of life. Now bourbon. If Scotch is the professor with elbow patches, bourbon is the person who shows up to the lecture in a leather jacket and actually makes it look good. To be legally called bourbon, your whiskey needs to check some very specific boxes. It must be made in the USA, not just Kentucky, though Kentucky makes 95% of it. The mash has to be at least 51% corn, which is what gives bourbon that caramel sweetness that makes it taste like a liquid dessert. But here's the rule that changed everything. Bourbon must be aged in new charred oak barrels. You can only use each barrel once for bourbon, and then it gets sold off, often to Scotland, as we just mentioned, but also to tequila makers, rum distillers, even hot sauce companies. Why new barrels? Because when you char the inside of a fresh oak barrel, you're creating this caramelized layer that pulls out vanilla, coconut, butterscotch, and all those cozy flavors. Old barrels don't give you that same intensity. It's like trying to reuse a tea bag, technically possible, but you're not getting the good stuff. Legend says bourbon got its name from Bourbon County, Kentucky, though the exact origin story is murkier than a barrel-aged cocktail. What we do know is that Kentucky's limestone water filters out iron and adds calcium, which apparently makes better whiskey. Kentucky distillers will tell you this for free, at length, without being asked. And unlike Scotch, which can add coloring, bourbon can't have anything added except water. No flavoring, no artificial color, nothing. What you get is pure grain, thyme, and charred oak doing their thing. There's also straight bourbon, which means it's been aged for at least 2 years and has nothing added. And bottled in bond, a designation from 1897 that means it's been aged at least 4 years, is exactly 100 proof and was made in one distilling season at one distillery by one distiller. Basically, it's bourbon's way of saying, I have receipts. So what does all this actually mean when you're holding a glass? Scotch tends to hit you with complexity. Maybe you get smoke, maybe you get honey and dried apricot, maybe you get that coastal saltiness. It evolves as you sip it. What you taste first isn't what you taste last. Bourbon? Bourbon gives you a warm hug made of caramel. It's sweet, it's rich, there's vanilla, there's oak, sometimes cinnamon or baking spices. It's less about subtle layers and more about bold, comforting flavors that make you feel like you're sitting in a cabin somewhere, even if you're actually in a studio apartment. And regular whiskey from elsewhere? That's your wild card. Japanese whiskey might be delicate and perfectly balanced. Irish whiskey tends to be smooth and approachable, great for beginners. Rye whiskey brings the spice. Canadian whiskey is often light and mixable. The glass matters too. Scotch people will serve it in a tulip-shaped glass called a Glencairn, which funnels the aromas right to your nose like a flavor megaphone. Bourbon folks might use a rocks glass or a Glencairn, less agreement on this front. Some people add a drop of water to open up the flavors. Some people add ice. Some people have strong opinions about both of these choices and will share them unprompted. So here's the bottom line. Whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon are all family, but they took very different paths. Whiskey is the broad category, the whole tree. Scotch is the branch that moved to Scotland, learned 300 years of tradition, and isn't about to change now. Bourbon is the branch that moved to America, traded subtlety for boldness, and made something entirely its own. There's no best choice. Just what speaks to you. Maybe you're a smoky Islay person. Maybe you're team bourbon and everything. Maybe you just want to try them all and see what happens. All valid. If you've got ideas for future episodes, drop them in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay hydrated, and maybe try something new. Cheers!